Hey, welcome to Moody Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in November and December. Now, originally, I had filmed a wrap-up for November. No idea where it went. The footage is lost in the ether. So we're just going to have a wrap-up for both months in one. So if this is very long, that'll be why. It's 2-month-long wrap-up. And so rather than going chronologically, I think I'm just going to kind of lump similar books together and talk about when I read them if I can remember in the moment. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to start out with manga and graphic novels. In the month of November, I finished the Girl from the Other Side series, which I've been talking about for a while. I loved this. I loved this so much. I need to sit down, or would like to sit down and do a longer video on the series, because this was just really great. The elevator pitch that I usually give for this book is that it's the perfect balance of wholesome and horror. So it's got kind of a lot of elements of it that are creepy, not like violent necessarily, or anything like that, but definitely creepy and like you're kind of scared for the characters on a certain level. But there's also a lot of wholesome stuff going on. This little girl was left behind. Her village ran away because this curse started to go through it. You kind of learn throughout the series what exactly the curse is, but this guy who is supposed to be like evil, that's what the people who are cursed turns into, but he has sentience and he actually cares for the girl. And the whole wholesome, scary dichotomy is just one piece of kind of duality that's throughout this whole series. That's motif, a theme that you kind of see throughout the whole thing, that down to the big like meaning of the story and the big reveal, both of those things are also tied up in like dichotomies. It's so good. I really enjoyed this. I started a couple of series in December. I will have a vlog up eventually. But I read some of the books that I was gifting my siblings. So the first series that I started was Demon Slayer, and I went in not really having any expectations. Like, I thought that I knew that it was popular, and I knew that it was going to be like fighting demons, whatever. I had pretty low expectations for it, but I ended up really loving it. There's some really good thematic stuff that I think can happen. The whole premise of this is that the main character, his whole family gets killed by demons except for his sister, who is turned into a demon, but she doesn't kill people. So he goes on this mission to become a demon slayer to kind of get revenge for his family, but also to try to turn his sister back into a human. So, this main character is so good. Like, all throughout this, he's really criticized for being so compassionate, but that's what makes him so great. That sort of hero, that sort of character, like, give me more of that. I definitely plan on continuing this series. I don't know if I'm going to read it or watch it. I had actually watched the first volume of Demon Slayer, and I just forgot. My friend showed me it along with a bunch of other stuff all at the same time, but when I got to, like, the third or fourth page, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, I remember this scene. But I'll either watch it or read it. I probably won't collect it unless I get to a point in the series where, like, you know, if it starts to get really good, you know, which it could turn into one of those that ends up being super, super great. I don't really know what the trajectory is like, but currently I would like to continue it. The other series that I read I read the first volume of Blue Period, and this was pitched to me as Haikyuu meets art school, and it hasn't, the first volume is just like an introduction, so I haven't really, I think, got into that as much. I think that more of that's going to be in the coming volumes, but in this first volume, you're introduced to our main character, who is pretty popular, has a lot of friends, but isn't really his authentic self. He takes an art class as kind of a throwaway class. He's kind of making fun of it with his friends, but he ends up really loving art. So you're seeing kind of the beginning of this character progression. There are also a lot of sequences with people doing art, and during these sequences, it actually tells you stuff about art, like you get to learn about shading or colors. So that's really cool. So there was a lot that I really liked about Blue Period. I will say, too, there is probably some sort of gender variant character. They don't say explicitly if the person identifies as a trans woman or gender fluid, or if they just like cross-dressing or what have you. I was a little bit concerned at first when they were introduced because they did use like the language of cross-dressing, and I was concerned that there was going to be like weird fan servicey stuff or like a lot of transphobia, but really I forgot that the character wasn't like just a cis girl until like they mentioned in the beginning of the volume, and then at the end when they have like extra stuff they switch to he pronouns, and I was like, wait a minute, what? And it kind of talked about it for a minute there. So there's nothing I think wrong in the first volume. There's no like it would be nice if it were made a little bit clear where the character, like who the character is, you know, but that character's also not the center of the story. I don't really know what trajectory it goes in, so hopefully it stays cool and, you know, doesn't go any weird directions. Or when I say weird, I'm really mean transphobic. Hopefully it doesn't end up being transphobic. I don't think that anything in the first volume was really weird, other than it was kind of unclear how they identified, but that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. I really enjoyed it. I actually originally bought the book for me, but like when I bought it, I was thinking, you know, my one brother would really like this. I should probably give him a copy. The more I thought about it, the more I was just like, you know what? I've got presents figured out and situated for everyone else now. He's gonna get that along with the stuff that I already got him. So hopefully he likes it. I really liked it, and again, I'm gonna continue the series. I don't know where Demon Slayer is hosted either. I need to figure that out to even see if I can stream them. I might check out the anime and decide if I want to read it or watch it, because I think that Blue Period would be really cool to see like in full color. So, but either way, they were both really good experiences. That's all for the manga, but I've got a couple of graphic novels. I read The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. I've had this book for a while, a good little while, but I've been kind of nervous to read it because I loved The Witch Boy so much. So I was kind of worried that this one will live up to it. I'm not going to sit here and compare them in any way, but this, like, I thought that it was going to be, you know, cute, mermaid romance, and it ended up being a cute, sapphic, selkie romance, and a lot more. Like, some of the themes that this ends up digging into hit, like, too close to home, particularly with the character of Morgan. She's the human, and she's trying really, really hard to fit in. She wants her, you know, her family to like her, she wants her friend group to like her, and she ends up being, you know, compartmentalizing parts of herself. She even calls herself, like, a social chameleon, and I really feel that. That is something that I related to really hard. That kind of thing is something that I've had to work a lot on digging myself out of. So seeing a character going through that and, like, dealing with that, made me feel really seen. And other than that, both of the characters are super cute. I loved Kelty's personality. In general, they're just both really cute, and I loved the artwork. And also at the end, you get to see more about, like, the character designs too. And you get to see them in different outfits, which was, I always love it when people throw in extras like that in there. But I loved this. I really hope that it gets a sequel. There is definitely room for a sequel. I don't know if one is in the works, but I want one. Then, the final graphic novel that I have to talk about was actually kind of disappointing. And that's Moonstruck, by Grace Ellis and Shay Beagle. The idea behind this is a magical world, lots of different magical creatures, and these two girls are werewolves, and they kind of start dating. A lot of the main premise has to do with one of the girls' best friend, who is a non-binary centaur. They get caught up in some shenanigans, and I don't want to say too much more just because it's a pretty short volume. The idea of it was really cute. I think that all the queer rep was handled really well. The art is cute, and there are some other cute like quips and stuff like that I really appreciated. However, I think that it was underdeveloped, which I feel like it's like hard to say, if something's going to be that long, like you can't really expect that much of it, but I feel like it tried to do a lot, and it couldn't really, like, handle it, I guess. I feel like the characters weren't necessarily that well fleshed out. Some of the scenes, I feel like, shifted really quickly, and it was a little confusing, which might just be a me thing, because that also happens to me in general with some manga. And also I feel like there was a lot of like either miscommunication or people like just automatically assuming the absolute worst of each other. And it felt like kind of a lot. So, in those ways it was kind of disappointing. I also feel like there were some dynamics that were introduced and then not explained. Like, I think that the best friend bit would have been fine. But there were also some people that she really didn't like, and that was confusing. I didn't really understand why. I didn't understand why they had to interact. Like, there's a backstory there, probably, but I don't know anything about it. So, this was okay. If you're thinking about reading it, I would go for it, because maybe you'll like it. Maybe it's better if you read multiple volumes. But I think I was just expecting more. I just lost 30 minutes of footage because I ran out of space and it corrupted one of the files. So I hate that for me. So we're going to rapid fire through the kids' books that I read, because I think the last thing that it actually saved was me starting to talk about that. So in November, I read lots of kids' books because I was shopping around for my sister's Christmas present. All of these were pretty cute. The only one that I kind of have, like, a little bit of issue with, I would still recommend the book, and I think I specified in a Goodreads review. If y'all are interested in actually hearing about the kids' books that I read, let me know. But, like, as far as I know, I feel like, I have, like, opinions about them, but I don't know how useful talking about these will be to other people. Not that I'm, I should just talk about what I want to talk about, but plus it's been like a month since I've read these. It would be maybe a little bit different if, I had more feelings closer to when I read them. So I'll just very briefly go over them. We have Extra Yarn, which is largely about sharing. We have Invasion of the Unicorns, which is about aliens that look like a stuffed animal in a claw machine going on like a mission to observe Earth. Think Big Little One and Dream Big Little One, which were cardboard books, board books, that were very briefly looking into different historical women. Why? Which was about this little girl who sees a supervillain smash into a mall, and then he kind of like tells his whole backstory. It's really cute and funny. underwear, good if you're potty training or if your kid is in that era where they constantly want to be naked. I know often those things coincide. The 1619 Project, Born on the Water, the best history book, like, for that age range that I've ever seen that addressed that stuff. I personally had some problems with the framing of it, but the bulk of the book is beautiful, well written. It's the only kids history book that I've read that isn't watered down. It obviously doesn't like hit on every single event, but it talks about the awful things that happened while still being age appropriate. We have Auntie Uncle Drag Queen Hero, which is my favorite book that I've read, the kids book that I've read. Dreamers, which is about immigration and libraries. Library Babies, exactly what it sounds like, cute. Love Makes a Family, All Kinds of Families, and Stella Luna, which is a reread because I read it in 2nd grade and read it again now. So far as poetry goes, in November, I read An American Sunrise by Joy Harjo. I read this for the Indigathon and Nonfiction November. This was incredible. She weaves together the history of the Trail of Tears with specific people of her own family's history and her own personal history. It's beautiful and heartbreaking, and I would definitely recommend it. I was honestly a little bit iffy because she's the poet laureate of the United States, which is impressive as hell. However, I do not trust the United States to make very many decisions, much less, pointing towards somebody who's not spitting out straight propaganda. It was excellent, and I highly recommend it. I'm looking forward to reading more of her work. In November, I listened to another poetry collection, While They Sleep by Raquel Salas Rivera. This was incredible. I read this for the 24/7 Barriquathon. I basically found it at random. I was looking through different Puerto Rican authors that had poetry collections that were available on Hoopla, and that was one that was available, so I listened to it. My intention was to listen to a poetry collection while I cleaned, because I have to be doing something while listening to an audiobook. I had to stop and just listen. There were parts of it that were that good. It was incredible, and, again, heartbreaking. A lot of it's talking about Hurricane Maria. I will say some of it's in Spanish. I have technically taken Spanish classes, but I'm awful at Spanish, so I can't really speak for that piece of it, but the parts that were in English, it was beautiful. And I actually went and bought one of their other poetry collections to check more of their stuff out. Moving into December's poetry, the first collection I picked up was You Better Be Lightning by Andrea Gibson, which is their most recent collection, and I loved it. They hit on a lot of different topics. They talk about gender, chronic illness, grief, there's love poetry. But the thing that brings all of these things together is this discussion of love and what love is. This is beautiful. I absolutely adored it, just like everything else Andrea Gibson has put out. It's very good. And as much as I loved that poetry collection, the one that I read right after it, I managed to like even more. And that is Alok Van Menen's most recent poetry book, Your Wound, My Garden. And they also talk about a lot of different things in this, and also focus a lot on love in this, to different degrees. But the thing with this collection, in general, poetry to me is a very emotional experience. Obviously, it's also literary, and there are literary devices that can make you feel different things. But before anything else, poetry reading, poetry existing, like in general, writing or reading, is an emotional experience to me. And this felt like poetry concentrate. Like, this is what poetry does to me, if that makes sense. Like, I was able to feel this so much. I felt like I was looking into them, into parts of them, and throughout certain parts of the poetry collection, I felt like I was being looked at as well, like deep in my soul. The one poem, like, I put a lot of tabs in this tiny book, but the one that got me the most, got me in that it made me cry the most, but also got me in that, like, that mutual, like, feeling like I was looking into them, and also feeling looked at, which I'm not gonna go into, like, the specifics of, like, there was some stuff that's, like, very clearly based off of their memories, which obviously aren't mine, but there's still a emotional similarity in our experience. But y'all probably don't need a whole essay on that. The poem that really got me was Dying is the Longest Verb I Know, which was about them losing their granddad. And, like, this is the piece of media that I have felt the most seen in regarding that experience. It was emotionally exhausting, but also very much emotionally, like, healing. And after that collection, or not, after that specific poem, the majority of the collection is about COVID, or was written, rather, during lockdown. So it was about the lockdown, about the state of affairs. I don't know why I said that like that, but just how people were being treated in the middle of all of this. And the experience of reading that, especially right after that one that was so very much, like, touching and relatable to me, it was so surreal reading those afterwards, because it was like, I realize how detached I am from the current trauma that's happening. And I think a lot of people are, like, in that same boat. But anyways, I'm probably talking about this too long, and I don't actually have that much space on my phone. This was incredible. This is, I think, my favorite poetry collection that I've read this year. Later on in the month, when I got on kind of a roll with a lot of audiobooks, I listened to Nature Poem by Tommy Pico. And with this, the title Nature Poem, I was expecting poems about nature, and it ended up being it was very much about the author's, like, tenuous relationship with that, not just the stereotype, but also pieces of, like, the culture. I don't want to speak too much on it. You can read the collection. It was very good. It was, there were parts of it that were very sad, but there was also a lot of, like, humor in places. And it was very good. I will say that I would really like to read it physically, because I think that there were some, like, literary bits that I missed, or, like, that I feel like sounds, like, weird or pretentious when I say it like that. I think that there are some things that they did writing it that you don't get audio-wise that you would get physically based on some of the reviews. Like, apparently they use, like, internet slang that I don't think that I caught. So, if I get the opportunity, I might reread it physically. I do have one of their other poetry collections physically that I would like to read. I read that during the 24/7 catch-up readathon, because I'd had that other Tommy Pico book on another TBR, so I just went ahead and read another poetry collection of theirs because it was available on Hoopla. Next, we can get into traditional novels that I read. I didn't actually physically read any, and these are all on audiobook. In November, I don't think that I read any novels. However, I got through like a string of audiobooks. All of these audiobooks I read for the 24/7 catch-up readathon. And all of these were on previous TBRs. So the first one that I listened to was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This was a middle grade novel that was originally on my March TBR. I have not read Coraline or seen Coraline before, but it was really great. I knew roughly what the story was, but like the atmosphere was immaculate. Like, you were engaged in that story. Like, the way that it was narrated, it was excellent, which is really a string through most of these, is that I think for the most part I chose excellent books to listen to on audio, or maybe that's bad. I didn't like go through and intentionally pick them. The books that I ended up reading were largely very like atmospheric and really got you in there. Coraline was one of them, and there were a couple lines that make me want to like reread it and really see what the themes are, because damn, in general, I was blown away by how he was able to make, it was a kid's book. There was nothing, like, it was a very good kid's book. However, it's also horrifying. And something that one of my coworkers said, I think they were mentioning in an interview that Neil Gaiman had done, or maybe it was people talking about the book. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But they were talking about how kids and adults read Coraline very differently. Kids see it as an adventure story, and adults see it more as like a horror, like a kid being left to their own devices and it being very scary. And I definitely read it as the latter. I tend to like, I'm kind of a mom friend, and also like I more easily like get secondhand embarrassment when watching stuff and stuff like that. So I think it makes sense that I would read it more as a horror. I wanted to save baby, but anyways, it was very good, very well done. I don't think I've really read that much middle grade this year, but I'm glad I got to read that one. After that, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. Finally, this was on several TBRs throughout the year, and I'm so glad that I listened to this on audiobook, because it, again, you are so immersed in this. And this is written in first person, as like this robot's log. So this robot was created kind of as like a mercenary for hire from this company, but it hacks its own system to where it can no longer let the company look at what it's doing and decide to engage with entertainment and other sort of content. And it kind of grows its own personality. It's hired by this group of researchers who are looking at this new planet, and so it's this adventure. But even while there's like this exciting like adventure plot going on, there's a lot of really good character and theme stuff going on, which is like I much prefer character and theme. Not that like a good plot is good, but it doesn't feel as much like I don't get as like attached to it, I guess. I really like this, and I really like the direction that it's going. This book by itself, like if it were a standalone, I would desperately want more, but I know it's part of a series, so I'm just really excited to see where this goes thematically and also like character development wise. After that, I started the American Hippo duology, which is The River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. This is a queer, weird Western. This is taking place in an alternative history where the United States chose to have hippos as their main source of cattle. And I've read Upright Woman Wanted and adored that. I've actually read that one twice. And I like Upright Woman Wanted better. But this has like the Western feel down like like, incredible. Like, Upright Women Wanted did too, but with, like, the plot and everything, it was, like, kind of over the top and cheesy with some of it, and, like, the way that it was narrated, just very Western. This was a really fun read. Again, I'm glad that I listened to it as an audiobook because you are, like, in it. I don't typically read, like, Western style, but this felt like it fit that so well in, like, an over-the-top kind of way that was just, like, really fun to read. I liked River of Teeth better. I thought that it was more focused, especially for, like, the way that it was written. I don't know. I just liked the first part better, but it is good overall as well. Then, the other novel that I listened to was Like a Love Story by Abdi Nezamian. This is a YA set in the 1980s. It's told from 3 different perspectives, which are each narrated by a different person, which I loved. I get very confused when there are different perspectives, or different focuses, and they don't make it very clear, and using a totally different narrator just, like, fixed all of that. Like, I had no problem with this. But the 3 main characters are Reza, who is a closeted Iranian boy who just moved to New York, Judy, a straight girl in New York who is very much engaged with the gay community, her gay best friend Art, who is the only out gay kid at his school. Judy and Art go to ACT UP meetings and are very engaged in that. Reza ends up becoming friends with Judy. Judy is interested in Reza, and Reza decides to be her boyfriend. He's gay, but he's trying. You know, he's closeted. It's the 1980s. There is this specter of AIDS, especially a lot of newer queer people. And it really kind of, like, digs into that. But, so you get this kind of conundrum of him trying to date Judy while, having feelings for Art. I really enjoyed reading this book. I will say that there were some things that I had problems with. However, there were also some things that I thought it did really, really well. So overall, I really liked this book, even though there were some, flaws in it. And really, I don't think that the flaws were very much different than a lot of other young adult, I think that there was specific parts of the characters and the plot that were maybe a little bit, like, cheesy, which isn't bad. It's just, it is what it is. The main thing that the main piece of criticism that feels important to me is that they started to do something really interesting. They talked about Art and the anger that he had regarding, people who are being homophobic and who just literally did not give a shit about AIDS. And, he talks about this anger, and there's this whole series of events that happens, and then it just, they stop talking about it. They kind of talk, like, I don't even know if it necessarily gets resolved so much as, like, it just kind of dissipates, even though there's another event later in the book that it would have made total sense for that anger to come back up in an even bigger way. And I at least wish that they would have addressed that, because there realistically would have been at least a little bit of struggle. And I think that they could have done a lot thematically, especially because there is a lot, especially towards the end, about, like, it's about love, which is something that a lot of people say now, which this was written in 2019, so this would have been, with this in mind, I think, so probably intentional, but I think that there are some really interesting thematic things that they could have done talking about anger and love, and, but anyways, I think it was a missed opportunity, but I don't even know if that was something that the author wanted to discuss. It was just something that I think would have been cool, but also, regardless of that, I think that they missed even other discussion of, like, the character dealing with their anger in the midst of tough things going on. But as far as the things that I liked a lot about this. Like, first and foremost, it was, like, fun to read, but the setting. I've been looking into the AIDS epidemic and the queer community in the 1980s and 90s, particularly the 80s, the past couple of years. And I really loved that the author was really able to use that. All of the, or at least most of, like, I could have missed one, but all of the big events that they take part in, like the protests, actually happened. You can go see footage of these. If you've read this book, go watch United in Anger. You'll get to see actual live footage of some of those things. And there are even some details in here that, like, I recall from watching that footage. Like in the protest at the church, where they're protesting the Catholic Church's stance on condoms and contraceptives. They teamed up with one of the abortion rights organizations. It mentions that. And then, like, down to some of the details, like, what the guy in the church was screaming, like, that's word for word what the dude was screaming. They even mention, like, the guy outside dressed up like Jesus, like, that guy was actually there. Another thing that I really loved about this is the role of friendships. Friendship is huge in this, and I really appreciate that. Like, in general, Art and Julie's relationship, and also seeing, you know, a big chunk of this story is Reza and Julie dating. Reza knowing that he's gay and is dating this girl. And I had lots of feelings about that as someone who, while obviously his experience is not the same as mine, that's the representation of that sort of situation was really nice to see. And I honestly think that that kind of situation is going to have been a lot more prevalent then. I forget what it's called, but the people who put together the big Harvey Milk documentary also put together something in the late 70s where they interviewed a bunch of gay people, and some of them were gay but previously in heterosexual marriages, and talked about the experience of being in that heterosexual marriage, and, like, they weren't sexually romantically attracted to that person, but that was still a relationship. They still had a connection with that person, and it was still valuable to them. And I think it's maybe hard for people to know, if they aren't in that situation, what that's like. And while I don't think that this delves into all of the emotional depths that it could have, I still really appreciate it, like, talking about that, and the complicated nature of that sort of situation. I feel like I'm rambling, so hopefully some of that made sense. I had personal feelings about it, but I also think that it's historically valuable. So that was all so far as fiction goes. Now, I do have some nonfiction bits that I read, other than the poetry, obviously, because the poetry was nonfiction. In November, I finished Capitalist Realism, Is There No Alternative by Mark Fisher. And this book, I'm like of two minds about. Like, there are pieces of it, like, I would definitely recommend this as something that you read, albeit critically. But I think that his main premise is very valuable. I think that it's definitely worth looking into, and definitely continues to be relevant. This idea of capitalist realism, and how the way that things are presented, we are led to believe that the only way to like function as a society is via capitalism and these different ways that capitalism functions. That main thesis that he has, it makes this absolutely worth reading. However, he brings in some stuff that are outside of the wheelhouse of that thesis, or kind of go outside of the realm of capitalism, and when he veers off like that, that tends to be where the weaker points are, because the book is this big. It's less than 100 pages. If you're like digging into like the nitty-gritty parts of one thing in this page length, it's definitely possible. This is like a thesis. But he starts to bring up certain things that are, you need a whole other one of these if you wanted to actually get in the proper nuance. And the problem with a lot of these things is that if he had dug more into them, I don't think his argument around these things would be, like, still there. Like, once you dig into the nuance, I don't think that he would end up saying the same thing about it. Like, I don't think that what he is claiming in certain instances would totally stand up to scrutiny when it comes to these kind of offshoots. For instance, at some point he starts to talk about the people in his classes being attached to their headphones and like constantly needing to be on their phone. I think that there's something to be said about technology and social media, certainly. But what he was saying very much felt like old man yells at cloud. He's upset because people in his class aren't listening. I don't think that what he was saying specifically really had much to do with his main point. It felt more like a reason to complain than it did something that added to his argument. And and I think that he would need data to back it up. Because if he's just saying, oh, well, I'm noticing that the kids are more attached to electronics and I think that it's because of X, Y, and Z, that's not really rigorous. You need more data in order to actually back that up and make that a valid argument, I think. The other bits that made me have some thoughts were also when he tried to like bring in leftism, because again, this is only 100 pages long. If you're going to critique certain leftists, especially like whole swaths of them, you're gonna need more. There's a lot that you could pull in general looking at all that I'm not gonna go into, but he just made a really large claim in passing. Anyways, all that is to say, I enjoyed this. I would recommend it. I think that his main concept of capitalist realism is really great and makes a lot of sense and is really important to grasp. However, I think that if you have a 100-page book, you need to rein it in a little bit, or at the very least acknowledge the limitations. That was the only nonfiction that I finished in November, other than the poetry collection. In December, I read Saturn Returns Survival Guide, going from political theory to astrology. You know, that's just what we're here with. I also had conflicting feelings about this. In the similar sense that, like, I liked it overall, but I also had criticism, but overall it's worth reading, although capitalist realism is the more important read. But anyways, Saturn Returns, it's an introduction to Saturn Returns, which is when Saturn is now in the sign that is in your birth chart, which happens roughly every 27 to 29 years. My Saturn return started March 2020. So, uh, you know, send some love to your local Saturn Aquariuses. But anyways, this is supposed to be, at least your first Saturn return is supposed to be like a big time of change, etc. This kind of explains that a lot. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate what it says about like how it interacts with your other placements, how both natal and current, I know there's a word for it, but my brain is fried, Saturn placement's going to impact your other planets. So depending on how your natal Saturn is aspected with your sun or your moon or something like that, is also going to impact Saturn return in certain ways, as well as what houses things are happening in. So I like what it says about how those can be affected. However, I had some issues when it started to talk about like specifics, like when it says like, oh, well, if your Saturn is in X house, this is what you're gonna deal with, or this is what you should think about. And I think that what they said in here is good and valid for some people. I don't think that it is an expansive enough interpretation, because there are a lot of houses and placements that like there are like multiple things going on there. And from someone who has been like I'm not an astrologer by any stretch of the imagination, but I have been looking a lot at astrology. I've read the other nonfiction book that I'm going to talk about is astrology. I think that this is a really great introductory book, but with that, I think some of the interpretations are a little bit underwhelming. But it was definitely worth reading if you're interested in like what Saturn return is. It's good. I would just say to, think about the houses and signs a little bit more expansively than they do. Then the final nonfiction book that I finished is the only astrology book you'll ever need, which I did not sit and read this from cover to cover. I've been using it over the past several months, so I have read most of it. But in December, I sat down and read the last piece of it that kind of talked about mythology and stuff that I hadn't read before. So now I'm calling it that I have read this whole book. Roughly. I put it in my Goodreads. But it is a good book. It's one that I reference a lot. There are parts of it, especially the parts where they have like one or two sentences instead of whole pages, which, when it talks about sun sign, rising sign, moon sign, and all of that, it gives really in-depth interpretations and like other stuff like that. When it's looking at aspects and stuff like that, it only has a sentence or two, so of course it can't be as in-depth. However, overall, this is really good. I use it a lot. I don't agree with the name, mostly because I believe in looking at multiple sources and feeling it out and seeing what actually relates to you is going to be the best way to go about astrology. But I also use it as like a self-help tool more than anything else. So I know that that's not everybody. But there you have it. That is all that I read in November and December. I do really quickly want to go over the books that I started and did not finish, because there are some cool ones in there that I think that y'all should read, even if my brain was too broke, as was the case in November or arguably part of December. We're not going to talk about it. Anyways, I started reading the MLM Basic course in November. Did not get very far through it. I need to sit down and read it. I don't have an explanation. I also don't have very much to say because I'm not that far into it. But it's a book that I started. In November, I also started An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. This has been on my TBR forever. It's excellent so far. I don't have much more explanation that I think would be helpful at this point. I definitely think you should pick it up. I just didn't get around to finishing it, but hopefully I will in 2022. I also, in November, started Between Certain Death and a Possible Future, Queer Writing on Growing Up with the AIDS Crisis. This is an anthology of people's experiences coming of age in the 90s. So they didn't grow up before AIDS. They didn't know life before AIDS. So they grew up with the general public opinion equating AIDS with being gay. And this is incredible so far. I mean, it's very moving, very hard to read, which is why I didn't finish reading it yet. I do plan on working my way through it. One of the things that I really appreciate about this anthology is the, I don't know, I'm not that far through it, but the first, barring the introduction, the first few actual entries in here are by people of color. And it is very hard, at least from what I've done. Maybe I'm missing something really obvious. If I am, please tell me. But it's been hard for me to find histories and experiences from queer people of color during the AIDS epidemic, which is ridiculous because people of color were more highly impacted by the AIDS epidemic, so they should be at the center of a lot of the discussions, but unfortunately they're not. I only found on my, you can't see it because there's a stack of library books in front of it, but I found one book on the Black community during the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, and I read that book from the ACE organization that mentions race, because a lot of the people who are part of the organization were women of color. But other than those things, I haven't really been able to find very much as far as books specifically on the AIDS epidemic goes. I do have another book on my TBR that mentions AIDS in the title, and it's specifically about queer people of color, but it's also it expands outside of the AIDS epidemic as well, which is great, and I'm excited to read it. But I would also like more books on the AIDS epidemic from the perspective of people of color. I am rambling. I'm so sorry. That's like the whole video is me rambling. That's why you're watching it. So maybe I'm not sorry, but this is very good. I love that voices of color are being centered because they have not been centered in most of the literature on this. This is a very important read. I'm not done reading it yet, but I can already tell you that you should read it. Then finally we have the book that I started in December but did not get to finish, and that is We Do This Till We Free Us, which is a book that I've seen a fair amount on Instagram, and I've recently seen a couple of people whose reviews I trust reading this. It's been on my radar for a while, and I finally went and got it this month. And I finished the first part, and started into the second. So this whole thing is on prison abolition, and so it's not, like, obviously it addresses the issues of the American prison system, but it's also talking about what abolition is, not just the problem, but what we do about it, what it is to imagine a different future. And it kind of hits on different things. The first part is kind of an introduction. The second part is talking about the complexity of situations that a lot of people are in. So all three of these, I can for sure say that you should read them even without having finished reading them. Fuck, my bookmark just fell out of one of them. That's gonna be fun to figure out. But anyways, that's been my read the past couple months. If y'all have read any of these, definitely let me know about it in the comments. I think that's all that I have. So thank y'all so much for watching. Bye.